Eva Cross had 47 minutes left before she lost everything her father had ever built. She stood outside the Velvet Room, a private lounge buried behind an unmarked steel door on the 62nd floor of a building most New Yorkers didn't even know existed. The kind of place where men who ran the city's underground economy sipped bourbon and decided who thrived and who disappeared from the business world overnight. She didn't belong here. She knew that. The doorman knew that. The two men in black suits flanking the hallway absolutely knew that. But desperation has a way of making a person fearless. "I need to speak with Silas Drake," Eva said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were trembling inside the pockets of her coat. The doorman didn't blink. "Mr. Drake doesn't take walk-ins." "Tell him it's about Cross Logistics." Something shifted in the doorman's expression. A micro-reaction. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. He tilted his head slightly, pressed a finger to his earpiece, and murmured something Eva couldn't hear. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then the steel door clicked open. Eva exhaled and stepped inside. The Velvet Room was quieter than she expected. No music, no crowd, just low amber lighting, leather seating arranged in private alcoves, and the faint smell of aged whiskey and cedar. A handful of men sat in distant corners, their conversations barely above a whisper. Every single one of them looked like they could buy a city block without checking their bank balance. A staff member led her down a narrow corridor to the very last alcove at the back of the lounge, separated from the rest by a frosted glass partition. She stopped at the entrance and gestured for Eva to continue alone. Eva stepped through. Silas Drake sat with one arm resting on the back of a dark leather chair, a glass of something untouched on the table beside him. He was younger than she had imagined, mid-30s maybe. Sharp jaw, dark hair pushed back, and eyes so calm they almost looked bored. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. Everything about him said control. Total, absolute, unhurried control. He didn't stand when she approached. He didn't greet her. He simply looked at her the way someone looks at a chess piece that just moved itself across the board without permission. "Sit down," he said. Eva sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Eva could hear her own heartbeat louder than anything else in the room. She had rehearsed this in the cab ride over. She had rehearsed it in the elevator. She had rehearsed it standing outside the steel door. And now, sitting 3 feet from the most dangerous man in New York's underground economy, every rehearsed word tangled together in her throat. So she skipped the introduction. "My uncle is about to hand over my father's company to a man named Roscoe. He's doing it tonight. By midnight, the paperwork will be filed, and Cross Logistics, everything my father spent 30 years building, will belong to a predatory lender who's been circling my family like a vulture since the funeral." Silas didn't react. His expression remained perfectly still. Eva pressed on. "I've tried lawyers. I've tried the courts. My uncle holds emergency power of attorney over my estate, and every legal avenue I've pursued has been blocked, delayed, or buried. I have no allies, no leverage, and no time." She paused, took a breath. "So I'm here to offer you something." Silas tilted his head a fraction of an inch. "Go on." "Under city registry law, a legal spouse automatically assumes co-guardianship of shared family assets. If I'm married, my uncle's power of attorney becomes void. His emergency authority over my estate dissolves the moment a marriage certificate is filed." Eva leaned forward. Her voice dropped. "I'm proposing a marriage of convenience, a legal arrangement. You get access to Cross Logistics shipping infrastructure, something I know your organization has been interested in for over a year. And I get protection, legal standing, a shield my uncle can't break through." She swallowed. "I know this sounds insane. I know you don't know me. I know I'm asking you to—" "Yes." Ava stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth was still open. The next word she had planned to say just evaporated somewhere between her brain and her tongue. "I'm sorry?" I said yes. Silas picked up his glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "We're leaving, now." Ava blinked. You don't want to hear the rest of the terms?" "I'll hear them in the car." Silas stood, buttoned his jacket with one hand, and pulled a phone from his pocket. He typed something quickly, then looked at her. "Your uncle has 2 men watching the front entrance of this building, and 1 sitting in a silver sedan on the east side of the block. If we leave through the main exit, they'll know where you are within 4 minutes." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching your uncle for longer than you think." He extended his hand toward a narrow side corridor she hadn't noticed. "Private exit. My car is already downstairs." Ava stood, her legs unsteady. This was happening. This was actually happening. 30 minutes ago, she was sitting in the back of a taxi, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Now she was walking through a hidden corridor with a man whose name made seasoned businessmen go pale. They moved through a service hallway, past a kitchen area, and through a heavy fire door that opened into an underground parking structure. A black, armored SUV idled near the ramp, its windows completely dark. A driver stood at the rear door, already holding it open. Silas gestured for Ava to enter first. She hesitated for exactly 1 second. 1 second where every rational thought in her head screamed at her to stop, to think, to reconsider. 1 second where the weight of what she was doing pressed down on her chest like a stone. Then she thought about her father, about the company he had built from a single delivery truck and a handshake, about the office where he used to let her sit on his desk and pretend to sign important papers when she was 7 years old, about the promise she made at his bedside, that she would never let anyone take what he built. Eva climbed into the SUV. Silas followed, closed the door, and the vehicle pulled out of the garage into the New York night. Behind them, Eldon's surveillance team sat watching the front doors of the Velvet Room, waiting for a woman who had already vanished. The SUV merged onto the interstate, and the city started to shrink in the rear-view mirror. Manhattan's skyline became a cluster of lights behind them, then a glow, then just a faint smear on the horizon. Eva sat on the opposite side of the back seat, her hands clasped tight in her lap. The space between her and Silas felt enormous and impossibly small at the same time. The vehicle's interior smelled like clean leather and something faintly metallic, the kind of scent that came with reinforced doors and bulletproof glass. She had so many questions they were practically stacking on top of each other inside her head. But the one that came out first surprised even her. "Where are we going?" "Upstate," Silas said without looking at her. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his face lit by the pale blue glow of the screen. "I have a residence outside the city, private, gated, off any registry your uncle's people would think to check." "I thought you lived in Manhattan." "I own property in Manhattan. I don't sleep there when things are active." He locked his phone and slid it into his jacket. "And things are very active right now." Eva turned her head toward the window. Trees were replacing buildings. The highway was getting darker, emptier. She could see her own reflection staring back at her. Tired eyes, messy hair pulled into a lone knot, the same coat she had been wearing since 6 that morning. She looked like someone running from something, which she supposed was exactly what she was. "You said you've been watching my uncle," she said quietly. "For how long?" 5 months. Eva turned back to him. 5 months? Roscoe has been expanding his lending operation across the eastern seaboard. He started targeting independent logistics firms about 2 years ago, buying debt, pressuring owners, folding their roots into his network. 6 months ago, his people started probing my transport corridors. Shipments getting delayed, manifests going missing, small disruptions designed to test response times. Silas paused, adjusting his cuff. I traced the interference back to Roscoe, and when I pulled the thread further, your uncle's name came attached to it. Eldon Cross had been funneling information about your father's shipping routes to Roscoe in exchange for debt forgiveness. Routes, client lists, warehouse codes, everything. Eva felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had known Eldon was desperate. She had known he had gambling problems, that he owed money to dangerous people. But hearing it laid out like this, the betrayal mapped in clean, factual lines, made it real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "My father trusted him," she said. "He put Eldon's name on the company charter as a backup executor. He thought he was protecting me." "Your father couldn't have known what Eldon would become after he died. People change when the person keeping them honest is no longer around." The SUV exited the highway and turned onto a 2-lane road flanked by dense forest. The headlights cut through absolute darkness. No streetlights, no other cars, just the low hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Silas reached into the center console and pulled out a slim black phone, different from the one he had been using earlier. He held it out to Eva. "Take this." She looked at it. "What's wrong with my phone?" "Your phone has been tracked since yesterday afternoon. Eldon's people installed a location monitor through a remote update pushed to your carrier account. He has administrative access to your family's cellular plan." Eva stared at him. "How do you—" "Because my people intercepted the request. Take the phone. It's clean, encrypted. The only numbers stored in it connect to me or to my security team. Do not use your old phone again." Eva took the device. It was lighter than she expected, smooth and featureless, no brand markings anywhere on the case. She slipped it into her coat pocket and felt the weight of it settle against her hip like a small anchor. "You keep saying, 'my people,'" Eva said. "How many people are involved in this?" "Enough." "That's not an answer." Silas looked at her directly for the first time since they had gotten in the car. His eyes were dark, steady, completely unreadable. "You walked into my lounge tonight and proposed a legal marriage to a man you've never met. You did that on faith. I'm asking you to extend that faith a little further." Eva held his gaze. She wanted to argue. She wanted to demand specifics, timelines, guarantees. But something in his tone, calm without being dismissive, firm without being threatening, made her pull back. "Fine," she said. "But I need to understand something. You said yes before I even finished talking. You already knew about Roscoe, about Eldon, about the company. So when I walked into that lounge tonight, you weren't surprised." "No." "Were you expecting me?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. The trees outside the window were thicker now, pressing close to the road like walls. "I was expecting someone," he said. "Your father's company was too valuable for Eldon to hand over without resistance from somebody in the family."
I had been waiting for weeks to see who would push back. Lawyers, distant relatives, former business partners. Someone was going to surface eventually. He turned his gaze forward again. "I didn't expect it to be you, and I didn't expect a marriage proposal." Eva almost laughed. Almost. The absurdity of the situation was starting to catch up with her. The SUV, the encrypted phone, the midnight highway. The fact that she was legally about to bind her life to a man whose last name made people lower their voices in public.
"For what it's worth,"
she said. "I didn't expect to be making one." The SUV turned through a set of iron gates that opened automatically as they approached. A long driveway stretched ahead, lined with tall oaks and soft ground lighting. At the end of it, a stone estate emerged from the darkness, large, elegant, and completely hidden from any road or neighboring property. The driver pulled up to the front entrance and stopped. Silas opened his door and stepped out. Then he turned back and looked at Eva. "From this point forward, no one can force your signature on anything. No one can enter this property without my authorization, and no one, not Eldon, not Roscoe, not anyone connected to either of them, will get within a mile of you." Eva stepped out of the car and looked up at the estate. The air was cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. The city felt like it existed in another universe entirely. "Tomorrow morning," Silas continued, walking toward the entrance, "I'll show you exactly what your uncle has been doing with your money. And then you'll understand why I said yes before you finished asking." The front door opened, and Eva followed him inside. Eva didn't sleep well. The bedroom Silas had given her was large and comfortable. A four-poster bed, heavy curtains, a window overlooking a stretch of woods that disappeared into morning fog. But her mind wouldn't quiet down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eldon's face. The way he had smiled at her father's funeral. The way he had put his arm around her shoulder and told her not to worry about anything. She had believed him. By 7 in the morning, she gave up trying to rest and found her way downstairs. The estate was quieter than she expected. No staff rushing around, no noise. Just the faint sound of birds outside and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from somewhere down the hall. She followed it to a wide, sunlit room at the back of the house. A long wooden table dominated the center, and Silas was already sitting at the far end, a laptop open in front of him and a stack of folders arranged in a neat row to his left. He was dressed in a dark sweater and trousers, sleeves pushed to his elbows, looking nothing like the man in the tailored suit from the night before. He looked like someone who had been awake for hours. A woman in her 50s stood near a side counter, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug. She glanced at Eva with a brief, professional nod and set the mug on the table near an empty chair. "Sit," Silas said, the same way he had said it the night before. Short, direct, no room for debate. Eva sat. She picked up the coffee and took a long sip. It was strong and black, exactly what she needed. "You said you'd show me what my uncle's been doing," she said, setting the mug down. "I'm ready." Silas closed his laptop and slid the first folder across the table to her. "This is a copy of your father's original trust charter, signed 8 years ago, notarized, filed with the state. It names you as the sole beneficiary of the Cross Family Trust, effective upon your 21st birthday. Your uncle was appointed as interim custodian with limited withdrawal authority, capped at $15,000 per quarter for estate maintenance only." Eva opened the folder. She recognized her father's handwriting in the margins. Neat, slanted letters. Notes he had made in blue ink, the same pen he always kept in his shirt pocket.
Her throat tightened. Silas slid a second folder across. "This is what your uncle actually did." Eva opened it. The first page was a bank statement, then another, page after page of withdrawals, transfers, and wire payments stretching back 3 years. The numbers started modestly, 10,000 here, 20,000 there, and then escalated sharply. 50,000, 80,000, 140,000 in a single month. "He pulled over $2 million from your trust in under 3 years, Silas said. He routed it through 4 different shell accounts before landing it in Roscoe's collection fund. Every payment was logged as estate maintenance, tax preparation, or legal fees. Your trust officer signed off on each one because Eldon submitted forged receipts from companies that don't exist."
Eva turned the pages slowly. Her fingers felt numb. $2 million. Her father had built that trust over decades, setting aside a portion of every deal, every contract, every successful quarter. He had told her about it once, casually, over dinner. It's your safety net, Eva. No matter what happens, you'll always have ground beneath your feet. And Eldon had gutted it. Why? Eva whispered. Why would he do this? Because he owed Roscoe, and Roscoe doesn't forgive debts. He restructures them. Every dollar your uncle couldn't repay got converted into leverage. Roscoe started demanding access to cross-logistics as collateral, shipping routes, warehouse leases, client contracts. Eldon gave him everything he asked for, because the alternative was financial destruction. Silas leaned back in his chair. But Roscoe wanted more. He wanted full ownership, and the only way to get that was to remove you from the equation entirely. That's what the conservatorship filing was about. If Eldon could get a court to declare you financially incompetent, he could transfer controlling interest in the company without your signature. Eva looked up. Financially incompetent? On what grounds? He fabricated a case, claimed you had been making erratic financial decisions, that you were emotionally unstable following your father's death, that you refused to cooperate with estate management. He even had a psychiatrist lined up to submit a written evaluation, someone who has never met you. The room was very still. Eva could hear the clock on the wall ticking. She could hear her own breathing, shallow and uneven. "How do you have all of this?" she asked. Because Roscoe made a mistake 4 months ago. He tried to reroute one of my shipment corridors through a warehouse your uncle had already signed over to him. My team flagged the discrepancy, and when we investigated, we found the entire paper trail, every forged receipt, every shell account, every wire transfer. Silas pulled a third folder from the stack, but didn't open it. He placed his hand flat on top of it and looked at Eva directly. There's something else you need to understand. The reason I agreed to marry you last night wasn't charity, and it wasn't impulse. Eva waited. Cross Logistics holds founding member status with 3 major port authorities along the eastern seaboard. That status grants access to priority docking, reduced tariff lanes, and bonded warehouse networks that take years to qualify for. If Roscoe takes control of your company, he inherits all of that access, and he will use it to build an entirely new distribution channel that runs directly through my territory. He tapped the folder once. I need a legal connection to the cross-corporate structure to access its internal audit records without triggering a court freeze. As your spouse, I have legal standing to request a full forensic review on your behalf. Without that standing, any attempt to intervene would get tied up in litigation for months, enough time for Roscoe to strip the company and vanish. Eva stared at the folders spread in front of her.
The trust documents, the stolen money, the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, the forged receipts, her father's life work, picked apart by the one person he had trusted to guard it. She closed the second folder and pushed it back across the table. "So we both need this marriage," she said. "Yes." "And when it's over? When Roscoe is gone and Eldon is out?" Silas met her eyes. "Then you decide what happens next. The marriage, the company, your future. All of it. Your choice. No conditions." Eva picked up her coffee. It had gone cold, but she drank it anyway. "Show me the rest," she said. The drive to White Plains took just over an hour. Silas had chosen the location carefully, a suburban county courthouse far enough from Manhattan that Eldon's network of legal informants wouldn't pick up the filing until it was already processed and sealed. Eva sat in the back seat of a different vehicle this time, a dark sedan, unmarked, with standard plates. Silas had explained that morning that they would rotate cars for every trip outside the estate.
No patterns, no repeated routes, no predictable behavior. "Your uncle has at least 2 contacts inside the Manhattan clerk's office," Silas had told her while they reviewed the plan over breakfast. "If we file anything in the city, he'll know about it within the hour. White Plains processes filings independently. By the time it hits the central registry database, it'll already be legally binding." Eva had nodded, absorbing each detail the way she used to absorb her father's business lessons. Carefully, quietly, filing everything away for later. Now, watching the suburbs roll past the window, she felt a strange sense of detachment, like she was watching herself from the outside. A woman in a grey wool coat riding toward a courthouse to marry a man she had met less than 40 hours ago. A man whose world operated on rules she was only beginning to understand. Silas sat beside her, reviewing documents on a tablet. He hadn't spoken much since they left the estate. He communicated in efficiency. Short sentences, direct instructions, no filler. Eva was starting to realize that this wasn't coldness, it was discipline. Every word he spoke had a purpose, and every silence had one too. "The registrar's name is Margaret Chen," Silas said, not looking up from his screen. "She's processed 3 previous filings for people connected to my organization. She's discreet, and she's fast. We'll be in and out in under 30 minutes. "You've done this before?" Eva asked. "Married someone for legal cover?" Silas glanced at her. "No, but I've helped others who needed clean paperwork filed without attention. Business partners, associates who needed name changes or property transfers handled quietly." "And Margaret doesn't ask questions?" "Margaret understands that some people value privacy more than conversation." The sedan pulled into a parking lot behind the courthouse, a modest brick building with wide steps and an American flag hanging limp in the windless morning air. 2 of Silas's security team were already positioned nearby. One sat on a bench reading a newspaper. The other leaned against a pillar near the entrance, pretending to check his phone. Neither of them looked at the sedan when it arrived. Silas stepped out first, buttoned his jacket, and opened Eva's door. They walked side by side up the steps and through the main entrance. Inside, the building smelled like old carpet and printer ink. A few people moved through the hallways, a couple with a toddler, a man carrying a stack of folders, a clerk pushing a cart of file boxes. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. Eva felt deeply out of place. They were directed to a small office on the 2nd floor. Margaret Chen was already waiting, a neat, composed woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose and a pen tucked behind her ear. She greeted Silas with a brief handshake and gestured for both of them to sit.
"I have everything prepared," she said, pulling a thin stack of papers from a manila envelope. "Standard marriage certificate, spousal declaration, and the registry filing form. I'll need 2 forms of identification from each of you and 2 signatures per document." Eva reached into her bag and pulled out her passport and driver's license. Silas produced his without a word. Margaret examined each one, made photocopies on a small machine behind her desk, and began filling in the official forms with careful handwriting. The process was surprisingly mundane. No ceremony, no vows, no witnesses beyond Margaret herself, who served as both registrar and legal observer. Just paper, ink, and signatures. Eva signed her name on the first document and felt nothing dramatic. No thunderclap, no rush of adrenaline, just the scratch of pen on paper and the quiet click of Margaret's desk clock marking another minute. She signed the second document, then the third. Silas signed after her each time. His handwriting was sharp and angular, every letter deliberate. Margaret gathered the papers, stamped each one with an official county seal, and placed them into a filing tray. "Processing will be completed by end of business today," she said. "The certificate will be entered into the state registry by 5 o'clock. Certified copies will be mailed to the address on file within 7 business days, but I can issue a temporary confirmation letter right now if you need immediate proof of filing." "We'll need it," Silas said. Margaret typed something into her computer, printed a single page, and handed it to Silas. He scanned it once, folded it precisely, and tucked it into his inner jacket pocket. "Thank you, Margaret." "Of course, Mr. Drake." They left the office and walked back down the hallway in silence.
Eva's footsteps echoed on the tiled floor. She was married. Legally, officially, on paper and in the state registry, she was someone's wife. The thought sat strangely in her chest, heavy and weightless at the same time. As they stepped outside into the pale midday sun, Silas pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke in short, clipped sentences that Eva could only half hear. "Filing is done. Push the notification to their legal team. Yes, all 3 documents. I want it on the board's desk before 2 o'clock. He hung up and looked at Eva. "The moment this filing hits the central database, your uncle's emergency power of attorney is automatically voided. State law is clear. A legal spouse supersedes a custodial appointee in all matters related to shared estate assets. Eldon will lose his authority over your trust, your shares, and your company voting rights in a single stroke." Eva let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "And Roscoe?" Roscoe's claim was built entirely on Eldon's legal standing. Without Eldon's authority, Roscoe has no pathway to the company. His leverage disappears. They walked down the steps toward the waiting sedan. Silas opened her door again, and Eva paused before getting in. "What happens when Eldon finds out?" Silas's expression didn't change. "He'll find out tomorrow. I've arranged an emergency board meeting at Cross Logistics headquarters for Thursday afternoon. Eldon will be there. He'll try to present his conservatorship papers to the board." "And?" "And we'll be sitting across the table when he does." Eva searched his face for something. Doubt, hesitation, even the faintest trace of uncertainty. She found nothing. Just that same, steady, immovable calm. She got in the car. Tomorrow, she would walk into her father's company for the first time since the funeral. And this time, she wouldn't be walking in alone. The Cross Logistics headquarters occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Eva hadn't been inside the building since the week after her father's funeral, when Eldon had gently suggested she take some time away from the office. "You need to grieve properly," he had said, squeezing her hand. "Let me handle the business side for now." She had trusted him. She had walked out of that building believing her uncle was protecting her father's legacy. That was 11 months ago. Now she was walking back in. The lobby was exactly as she remembered. Polished marble floors, the company logo etched into the wall behind the reception desk, the faint hum of elevator cables behind brushed steel doors. She used to come here as a teenager after school, sitting in her father's office doing homework while he took calls and reviewed shipping manifests. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Wallace who had worked there for 15 years, recognized her immediately. "Miss Cross," he said, standing up straighter. "It's been a long time." "It has, Wallace." His eyes moved to Silas, who stood a half step behind her in a dark navy suit, hands clasped in front of him. Wallace's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, then caution. He knew who Silas Drake was. Most people in this building probably did. "We're here for the board meeting," Eva said. "14th floor." Wallace hesitated, glanced at his screen, and nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Conference room B. Mr. Cross called it for 2 o'clock. "I know." Eva walked toward the elevators with Silas beside her. Behind them, 2 members of Silas's legal team followed at a measured distance, a tall woman with a leather briefcase and a man in rimless glasses carrying a slim document case. They looked like corporate attorneys. They were corporate attorneys. But they worked exclusively for Silas, and they had spent the last 48 hours preparing every piece of paper currently inside that briefcase. The elevator ride was silent. Eva watched the numbers climb and felt her pulse quicken with each floor. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and took a slow breath. "He's going to be shocked," she said quietly. "Good," Silas replied. The doors opened onto the 14th floor, and Eva stepped into the corridor she had once known as well as her own apartment. The carpet, the framed photographs of shipping vessels along the walls, the glass-walled conference room at the far end,
where she could already see figures seated around a long, oval table. She counted 5 board members. 3 she recognized, long-time associates of her father. 2 were newer, people Eldon had likely brought in during her absence. And at the head of the table, leaning back in the chair that used to belong to her father, sat Eldon Cross. He was 54, with thinning grey hair combed neatly to one side and a face that always seemed to carry a practiced expression of concern. He wore a blue pinstriped suit and was speaking to the man seated to his right when he looked up and saw Eva through the glass. His expression froze. Then his eyes moved to Silas, and Eva watched something pass across her uncle's face that she had never seen before. Fear. Real, undisguised fear, there and gone in less than a second before he reassembled his composure. Eva pushed open the conference room door. "Good afternoon," she said. Every head turned. The 3 senior board members, Mr. Whitfield, Mrs. Okoro, and Mr. Tanaka, looked genuinely surprised and relieved. They hadn't seen Eva in nearly a year, and all 3 had been close to her father. "Eva," Mr. Whitfield said, half rising from his seat. "We didn't know you were coming." "I wasn't invited," Eva said, "but I believe this meeting concerns my company, so I thought I should be present." Eldon recovered quickly. He always did. He stood, adjusted his tie, and spread his hands in a gesture that was meant to look welcoming. "Eva, sweetheart, of course you're welcome here. I called this meeting to discuss the future of the company, and your input is always—" "Let's skip that part," Eva said. She pulled out a chair at the opposite end of the table and sat. Silas took the seat to her left. His legal team remained standing near the door, the briefcase resting on a side table, unopened. Eldon stared at Silas. "I'm sorry. Who are you, and why are you sitting in a private board meeting?" "This is Silas Drake," Eva said. "My husband." The room went completely still. Mr. Whitfield's pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table. Mrs. Okoro's lips parted slightly. Mr. Tanaka removed his glasses and cleaned them, which Eva remembered he always did when he was processing something unexpected. Eldon laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Your husband? Eva, what are you talking about?" Silas reached into his jacket and placed the certified confirmation letter on the table. He slid it toward the center without a word. Eldon picked it up, read it again. His jaw tightened. "This was filed yesterday," he said, "in White Plains." "Correct," Silas said. It was the first word he had spoken since entering the room, and it landed like a stone dropped into still water. "Which means, under state law, your emergency power of attorney over Eva's estate is no longer valid. Spousal authority supersedes custodial appointment, effective immediately." Eldon set the letter down slowly. "This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and—" "I can." Silas nodded toward his legal team. The woman with the briefcase stepped forward, opened it, and placed a bound document in front of each board member. "This is a formal injunction filed this morning with the New York State Supreme Court, freezing all custodial authority previously granted to Eldon Cross over the estate of the late Henry Cross. It also places a temporary hold on any pending corporate transfers, share reassignments, or conservatorship proceedings related to Cross Logistics." Eldon's face drained of color. He picked up the bound document and flipped through it, his hands visibly unsteady. "You had conservatorship papers prepared," Eva said, her voice steady. "You were going to tell this board that I was mentally unfit to manage my own inheritance. You hired a psychiatrist who has never examined me to submit a false evaluation." The room turned to Eldon. Mr. Whitfield leaned forward. "Eldon, is this true?" Eldon opened his mouth, closed it, and looked around the table for support. He found none.
The two newer board members he had appointed were staring at their copies of the injunction with widening eyes, already calculating their own legal exposure.
"This meeting is over," Eva said. "The board will receive a full forensic audit of all financial activity conducted under my uncle's authority within the next 72 hours. Until that review is complete, Eldon Cross has no standing in this company."
Eldon stood abruptly, his chair rolling back and hitting the wall behind him. He looked at Eva, then at Silas, and for a moment it seemed like he was going to say something. A threat, an excuse, an appeal. Instead, he straightened his jacket, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of the conference room without another word. Corporate security, quietly summoned by Silas's team during the meeting, was waiting in the hallway to escort him from the building. 2 days passed after the boardroom meeting. 2 days of phone calls, legal filings, and a steady stream of documents flowing between Silas's legal team and the Cross Logistics board. Eva spent most of that time in the study at the Woodland estate, reviewing corporate records, responding to messages from Mr. Whitfield, and trying to piece together a timeline of exactly how much damage Eldon had caused during the 11 months she had been away from the company. On the evening of the second day, Silas walked into the study and set a glass of water on the desk beside her. She hadn't asked for one, but she realized when she saw it that she hadn't had anything to drink in hours. She picked it up and took a long sip. "We're moving," Silas said. Eva set the glass down. "Moving where?" "I have a place on the coast, Rhode Island. Private road, gated access, no public records attached to my name. We'll leave in the morning." "Why? I thought this estate was secure." Silas pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat across from her. He folded his hands and rested them on his knee, a posture Eva was beginning to recognize as the one he adopted when he was about to explain something she wasn't going to like. "Roscoe's accounts haven't been frozen yet. He still has resources and he still has people. After what happened in the boardroom, he knows his legal pathway to your company is closed. That means he's going to start considering other options." "What kind of options?" Cross Logistics' founding documents include original stock certificates, physical certificates, that carry legal weight in any ownership dispute. They're held in a secure deposit at the company's registered bank. If Roscoe can't take the company through the courts, he might try to seize those certificates directly. Possession of original share documents can create legal complications that take months to untangle, even when the claimant has no legitimate standing. Eva leaned back in her chair. "You think he'd actually try something like that?" "I think a man who spent 3 years building a pathway into your father's company won't give it up because of one bad afternoon in a boardroom. Roscoe is patient, strategic, and desperate. And desperate men get creative. We need to be somewhere he won't think to look while we prepare the next step." Eva looked around the study. She had started to feel settled here. The estate was quiet, surrounded by trees, far from the noise and pressure of the city. She had found a routine, waking early, working through the morning, walking the grounds in the afternoon when her eyes got tired from reading financial documents. It wasn't home, but it had started to feel like a safe harbor. Now they were moving again. "How long will we be in Rhode Island?" she asked. "As long as it takes to secure the evidence we need to shut Roscoe down permanently. A few days, maybe a week." Eva nodded. She had learned to stop asking for certainties. In Silas's world, timelines were flexible. The only thing that was fixed was the outcome he intended to reach. They left the estate at 6 the following morning. Silas drove again, a dark SUV with tinted windows and plates registered to a holding company Eva had never heard of. The drive east took them through Connecticut and into Rhode Island, following back roads that wound through small towns and stretches of farmland. The highway would have been faster, but Silas preferred routes that were harder to predict and harder to follow. Eva watched the landscape change outside her window. Trees thinned out and gave way to open fields, then to the low, scrubby terrain that signaled the coast was near. She could smell salt in the air before she could see the water, a clean, sharp scent that cut through the car's interior every time Silas cracked his window an inch. The coastal villa sat at the end of a gravel road lined with tall seagrass and low stone walls. It was smaller than the woodland estate, but more elegant. White clapboard, dark shutters, a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house. Beyond the back porch, a stretch of rocky shoreline dropped down to the Atlantic. The water was grey and restless, rolling against the rocks in long, steady rhythms. 2 of Silas's security team were already on site. Eva saw one of them near the gate as they pulled in, and another standing on the porch. Neither acknowledged the vehicle. They just watched, noted, and returned to their positions. Inside, the villa was warm and simply furnished. Hardwood floors, white walls, a stone fireplace in the main room with a stack of split wood beside it. Someone had stocked the kitchen. Fresh bread, coffee, fruit, a few prepared meals wrapped in foil. Everything arranged with the kind of quiet efficiency that seemed to follow Silas everywhere. Eva set her bag in the bedroom she was given, a small, clean room with a window facing the ocean, and came back downstairs. Silas was in the kitchen, brewing coffee. He poured 2 cups without asking and set one on the counter for her. They took their coffee out to the porch. The wind was steady and cold, carrying spray from the rocks below. Eva wrapped her coat tighter and leaned against the railing. The horizon was a flat, grey line where the ocean met the sky, unbroken in every direction. "Can I ask you something?" Eva said. Silas stood a few feet away, holding his cup with both hands. "Go ahead." "When this is over, when Roscoe is finished and Eldon is out, what happens to us? To this arrangement?" Silas took a sip of his coffee. He looked out at the water for a long moment before answering. "When this is over, you'll have your company back. Full control, full ownership, no liens, no claims, no one standing between you and what your father built. And you'll have complete freedom to decide what comes next. If you want to dissolve the marriage, I'll file the papers myself. If you want to keep it as a legal structure for business purposes, we can renegotiate terms. Whatever you choose, I'll respect it." "And what do you want?" Eva asked. Silas turned his head slightly and looked at her. "What I want doesn't factor into this. I made you a commitment the night you came to me. I told you that your choices would remain yours. That hasn't changed." Eva studied his face. The cold sea wind pushed his hair across his forehead, and he didn't bother to fix it. In that small, unguarded moment, he looked different. Less like the man who commanded rooms full of powerful people, more like someone carrying a weight he had chosen to carry and would never complain about. She was starting to notice things like that. Small details. The way he always poured her coffee before his own. The way he positioned himself between her and any door when they entered a new space. So automatic, it seemed unconscious. The way he never raised his voice, never rushed her, never made her feel like her presence was an inconvenience. Every decision he made seemed to account for her comfort and her safety, woven into his planning so seamlessly that she almost didn't see it. She was seeing it now. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. For the estate, for the boardroom, for getting me out of Manhattan before Eldon could finish what he started. I know this is a business arrangement for you, and I know you have your own reasons for being involved. But you've treated me with more respect in the past 6 days than most people have shown me in the past year." Silas held her gaze. Something passed through his expression, brief, quiet, hard to name. Then he looked back at the ocean. "Your father helped my family when no one else would," he said. "Treating his daughter with respect is the least I can do." Eva didn't ask what he meant. She could tell from his tone that it wasn't the right time. There was a story behind those words, and she would hear it eventually. But tonight, standing on the porch of a coastal villa, with the Atlantic stretching out into the darkness, it was enough to know that the man beside her was exactly who he appeared to be. They stood on the porch until the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge over the water. Then they went inside, and Eva slept better than she had in weeks. The drive from Rhode Island to Boston took just under 2 hours. Silas had arranged for them to leave before dawn, when the coastal roads were empty and the morning fog was still thick enough to swallow headlights within a few car lengths. Eva sat in the passenger seat of a black sedan, a different vehicle from any they had used before. Silas drove this time. No driver, no security detail in the car itself, just the two of them and a leather bag on the back seat containing a set of financial authorization documents that Eva had signed the previous evening. "Your team isn't coming?" Eva had asked when she saw the empty driveway that morning. "They're already there," Silas had replied. "2 arrived last night. 2 more will be in position by the time we reach the city. If anyone is watching the estate and sees a convoy leave, they'll follow the wrong cars." Eva was beginning to understand how Silas operated. He never moved in straight lines. Every action had a secondary purpose, every route had an alternative, and every plan had a version that accounted for the version failing. It was exhausting to think about, but she was starting to appreciate it. In her world, the world of logistics contracts and shipping schedules, planning meant anticipating delays and weather patterns. In his world, planning meant anticipating people, and people, as Eva was learning, were far less predictable than weather. They arrived in Boston by 8:30 and parked in an underground garage beneath a financial district office tower. Silas led her through a service corridor and up a freight elevator to the 9th floor, where a private forensic accounting firm occupied a modest suite of offices behind an unmarked door. The firm's name was Callaway & Riggs. Eva had never heard of them, which, Silas explained, was the entire point. "They specialize in tracing hidden capital flows," he said as they walked down a carpeted hallway. "International trusts, shell corporations, buried subsidiaries. If money has been moved and someone doesn't want it found, these are the people who find it." A man met them at the end of the hallway. He was in his late 60s, thin, with silver hair and wire-framed glasses. He wore a cardigan over a dress shirt, which made him look more like a retired professor than someone who dismantled financial crimes for a living. "Arthur Riggs," he said, shaking Eva's hand. "I've been expecting you." He led them into a corner office stacked with filing cabinets and bankers' boxes. A large monitor on his desk displayed a spreadsheet so dense with numbers it looked like static. Arthur closed the door, drew the blinds, and sat behind his desk. "Your father was a careful man, Miss Cross," Arthur said, folding his hands on the desk. "When he established Cross Logistics' financial infrastructure, he built in redundancies that most companies his size wouldn't bother with. Dual signatory accounts, offshore contingency reserves, a founding ledger system that required physical verification for any ownership transfer." He opened a drawer and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the desk. "This is the original founding ledger for Cross Logistics. It contains the master record of every initial capital investment, every original shareholder agreement, and every ownership clause your father wrote into the company charter. It's the only document that can legally override the digital records your uncle has been manipulating." Eva stared at it. She recognized the leather, the same type her father used for all his important documents, dark brown, slightly worn at the edges, with his initials embossed in small gold letters at the bottom right corner. "How long have you had this?" she asked. "Your father entrusted it to me 7 years ago," Arthur said. "He told me that if anything ever happened to him, someone from his family would eventually come looking for it.
He made me promise to release it only to a direct heir with verified legal standing. Arthur looked at Silas. Which is why I needed confirmation of the marriage filing before I could hand it over. Spousal co-guardianship gives you joint legal standing over cross-family corporate assets. Without that filing, I couldn't release this ledger to anyone except Eva herself, and your uncle had already petitioned to have Eva's independent legal authority suspended. Eva reached out and touched the leather cover. Her father had held this, had written inside it, had carried it to this office, and placed it in the hands of a man he trusted enough to guard it for years. She opened it. The pages were dense with her father's handwriting. Account numbers, investment records, partnership agreements, all meticulously documented in blue ink. And there, near the back of the ledger, she found what Silas had been looking for. A complete record of every offshore reserve account linked to Cross Logistics, including 3 accounts her uncle had been draining without authorization. "This is everything," Eva said quietly. "That's everything," Arthur confirmed. Silas checked his phone. His expression shifted, a subtle tightening around his eyes that Eva had learned to recognize over the past few days. It meant something had changed. "We need to move," he said. Arthur didn't flinch. He had clearly dealt with situations like this before. He slid the ledger across the desk to Eva, who placed it carefully inside the leather bag. "How many?" Arthur asked calmly. 2 vehicles, parked on the street outside the east entrance. They arrived 12 minutes ago. "Roscoe's people?" "His private investigators. They've been tracking courthouse filing records, trying to figure out where we went after White Plains. Boston was on their list." Eva felt her chest tighten. "They know we're here?" "They know we're in the building. They don't know which floor or which office." Silas was already texting. "Arthur, is the service corridor on this floor still connected to the west stairwell?" "It is. Leads down to the loading dock on the basement level." Silas nodded. "My team has a vehicle waiting on the opposite block. We go down through the loading dock, cross through the adjacent building's parking structure, and exit on Federal Street. By the time Roscoe's people realize we've left, we'll be on the highway." Arthur stood and shook Eva's hand again. "Your father would be proud of you, Miss Cross. He always said you were the toughest person in the family." Eva held the old man's hand for an extra second. "Thank you for keeping this safe." They moved quickly after that, down the service corridor, through a fire door, down 4 flights of concrete stairs to the basement level. The loading dock was empty, except for a delivery truck and the lingering smell of cardboard and diesel. Silas pushed open a metal door that connected to the neighboring building's underground parking, and they crossed through rows of parked cars until they reached a dark blue sedan idling near the Federal Street exit. One of Silas's men was behind the wheel. Another sat in the passenger seat, scanning the street through the windshield. Eva and Silas climbed into the back seat. The sedan pulled out of the garage and merged smoothly into downtown Boston traffic. Eva held the leather bag against her chest, feeling the weight of the ledger inside. Her father's handwriting, his careful records, his foresight. "He planned for this," she said, almost to herself. "He knew something might happen." Silas looked at her. "Your father understood people. He knew what Eldon was capable of long before Eldon knew it himself." Eva leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. The ledger was secure. The proof was in her hands. And somewhere behind them, Roscoe's investigators were standing outside an office building, watching doors that nobody was going to walk through. They didn't go back to Rhode Island. Silas made a call during the drive and rerouted them to a private hotel in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, a small, elegant building with no visible signage and a concierge who greeted Silas by name without being told he was coming. The suite occupied the entire top floor.
2 bedrooms, a sitting room with tall windows overlooking the Charles River, and a dining area where a pot of tea and a tray of sandwiches had already been laid out, as if someone had known exactly when they would arrive. Eva set the leather bag on the dining table and carefully removed the founding ledger. She opened it to the first page and began reading from the beginning, slowly this time, giving every entry the attention it deserved. Silas sat across from her with his own stack of documents, the financial audits his team had compiled over the past 5 months, cross-referencing account numbers and dates against the entries in the ledger. They worked in silence for over an hour. Eva lost track of time. The sky outside the windows shifted from pale afternoon grey to the soft amber of early evening, and she barely noticed. Her father's handwriting pulled her through each page like a voice she hadn't heard in over a year, guiding her through the architecture of the company he had built. She found the offshore accounts first, 3 of them, established in different jurisdictions, one in the Cayman Islands, one in Ireland, one in Singapore. Each one was linked to a specific division of Cross Logistics and held reserves her father had set aside for long-term expansion. The balances listed in the ledger were substantial. When she compared them to the current statements Silas had obtained, the discrepancies were staggering. Eldon drained nearly 60% of the Irish account, Eva said, running her finger down a column of numbers. And the Singapore reserve is almost empty. He moved the funds in small increments, never more than 40,000 at a time, to stay below the automatic reporting threshold. Roscoe taught him that, Silas said. It's the same method Roscoe uses across all his lending operations. Small transfers, rotating intermediary accounts, just enough distance between the source and the destination to make tracing difficult. Eva turned another page and stopped. Near the back of the ledger, tucked between 2 pages of partnership agreements, was a folded sheet of paper she hadn't expected. It was different from the rest. Older, slightly yellowed, with a crease pattern that suggested it had been opened and refolded many times. She unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, handwritten, dated 18 years ago, and it was addressed to her father. She read the first line and looked up at Silas. "What is this?" Silas set down the document he was holding. His expression changed. Something subtle shifted behind his eyes. He looked at the letter in Eva's hands and was quiet for a long moment. "That," he said, "is something I was going to tell you about. I was waiting for the right time." Eva looked back down at the letter and read it through. It was written by a man named Constantine Drake. The language was formal, almost old-fashioned, but the emotion behind it was raw and unmistakable. Constantine wrote about a period in his life when his entire business empire had collapsed. Bad investments, a partner who had stolen from him, a series of legal battles that had consumed everything he had built over 20 years. He described standing on the edge of complete financial ruin, unable to pay his employees, unable to feed his family, unable to see any path forward. And then Henry Cross had appeared. The letter described how Eva's father, who had been a mid-level logistics operator at the time, had learned about Constantine's situation through a mutual associate. Without being asked, Henry had offered Constantine a private loan, enough to stabilize his operations, pay his workers, and rebuild. The loan came with no interest, no timeline, and only one condition, that Constantine never speak of it publicly. Constantine's letter was a private expression of gratitude. He wrote that Henry's generosity had saved his family, his legacy, and his dignity. He pledged that the Drake family would honor that debt for as long as they existed. Eva set the letter down on the table. "Constantine Drake," she said. "That's your father." "Yes." The room felt different. The air between them had shifted. Eva studied Silas's face and for the first time saw something behind the discipline and control. Something quieter, something that had been there since the night she walked into the velvet room. "You knew about this before I came to you," Eva said. "I grew up knowing.
My father told me the story when I was 14. He said that if it weren't for Henry Cross, I would have grown up with nothing. No education, no resources, no foundation. Everything I have, everything my family rebuilt, started with your father's decision to help a man he barely knew. Silas leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. When I took over my father's operations, I made a list of obligations, debts that mattered, promises that needed to be kept regardless of business strategy or personal cost. The debt to the Cross family was at the top of that list. Eva felt her throat tighten. So when I walked into that lounge and started talking about a marriage proposal, I already knew who you were. I had already been tracking what Eldon was doing to your company, and I had already decided that if the opportunity came to repay what your father did for mine, I would take it without hesitation. He paused. That's why I said yes before you finished asking. It was business, yes. Roscoe is a threat to my operations, and stopping him protects my interests. But it was also personal. Your father gave my family a second chance when the rest of the world had written us off. I owe him something that can't be measured in money or contracts. Eva picked up the letter again. She read the last paragraph one more time. Constantine's closing promise, written in slightly unsteady handwriting, that his family would stand beside the Cross family whenever they were needed. 18 years later, his son had kept that promise. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the ledger. My father never mentioned this, she said. He never told me about helping your family. He never even said the name Drake. That was the condition. He didn't want recognition. He didn't want a relationship built on obligation. He just wanted to help. Eva was quiet for a while. The city lights outside the window reflected off the river in long, broken streaks of gold and white. She thought about her father, the way he always treated people, the way he gave without keeping score, the way he believed that doing the right thing was its own accounting. She looked at Silas across the table, surrounded by spreadsheets and legal documents and the evidence of everything her uncle had tried to destroy. This man had entered her life 48 hours ago as a strategic alliance, a calculated risk, a name she had chosen out of desperation. And now she was sitting across from him, discovering that their families had been connected by something far deeper than logistics routes and corporate audits. Thank you, she said. Silas held her gaze for a moment. Don't thank me yet. We still have work to finish. Eva nodded. She pulled the ledger closer, opened it to the next section of accounts, and kept reading. But something between them had changed. The distance that had defined their arrangement from the first night, the careful, professional gap between two people bound by paper and necessity, had grown smaller, and neither of them moved to widen it again. They returned to New York 2 days later. Silas had spent the morning in the hotel suite making phone calls, short, precise conversations in low tones that Eva could hear through the walls but couldn't make out. By the time she finished breakfast, he had already packed and was waiting for her in the sitting room with his coat on. We're going back to Manhattan, he said. It's time to close this. The drive south felt different from every other trip they had taken together. There was a focused energy in the car, a sense of forward motion that went beyond the highway beneath them. Silas reviewed files on his tablet, made 3 more calls, and exchanged a rapid series of texts with someone whose name Eva never saw on the screen. Whatever he had been building over the past 11 days was reaching its final shape. They arrived in Manhattan by early afternoon and drove directly to a commercial bank tower in the financial district. The building was tall, modern, and anonymous, the kind of place where billions of dollars moved through fiber optic cables every day without anyone on the street below ever noticing. Silas led Eva through a private entrance on the building's east side, past a security checkpoint staffed by men who clearly recognized him, and into an elevator that required a key card to operate. They rode up to the 31st floor in silence. The doors opened onto a wide, quiet corridor with polished floors and recessed lighting. At the end of the hallway, a glass-walled conference room was already occupied. Eva could see 4 people inside, 2 men and 2 women,
all seated around a rectangular table covered with documents, laptops, and what appeared to be a real-time financial monitoring system displayed on a large, wall-mounted screen. "Who are they?" Ava asked. "State financial compliance officers," Silas said. "2 from the Banking Commission, 2 from the Commercial Fraud Division. I've been feeding them information about Roscoe's lending network for the past 3 months. Today, they act on it." Ava stopped walking. "You've been working with state authorities?" Silas turned to face her. "Roscoe operates across 6 states. His lending network processes money through 14 different commercial banks, 9 shell corporations, and at least 20 private accounts under false names. Taking him down isn't something one person can do, no matter how many resources they have. It requires institutional power." "I thought you preferred to handle things inside your own organization." "I do, when I can. But Roscoe's operation is woven into the legitimate banking system so deeply that pulling one thread without the right authority would just alert him and give him time to move everything offshore. The only way to collapse his network completely is to freeze every account simultaneously. And for that, I need people who can issue federal-level financial holds." He gestured toward the conference room. "These 4 have the authority to do exactly that." They entered the room. The officers stood briefly, a formality, and Silas made introductions. The lead officer, a woman named Director Harlow, shook Ava's hand and invited her to sit. "Miss Cross, your cooperation has been essential in building this case," Director Harlow said. "The founding ledger you recovered in Boston provided the last piece of documentary evidence we needed to establish a clear chain of fraud between Roscoe's lending operation and your family's corporate accounts." Ava glanced at Silas. He gave her the slightest nod. Director Harlow turned to the wall screen and pulled up a map of the eastern seaboard dotted with colored markers, red for Roscoe's known accounts, blue for intermediary shell corporations, green for the banks that processed his transactions. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, we initiated coordinated account freezes across all 14 commercial banks connected to Roscoe's lending network.
Every checking account, savings account, money market fund, and wire transfer channel associated with his operation has been locked. No deposits, no withdrawals, no transfers." She tapped the screen, and several of the red markers turned gray. Simultaneously, our fraud division issued preservation orders to the 9 shell corporations Roscoe used to launder funds. Their corporate accounts are now under state supervision. Any attempt to move money will be flagged and blocked in real time. Ava watched the markers change color one by one. Each gray dot represented a piece of Roscoe's empire going dark. Money he couldn't touch. Accounts he couldn't access. Leverage he no longer had. "What about his personal accounts?" Ava asked. "Frozen as of 11:15 this morning," one of the male officers said. "Mr. Roscoe currently has access to approximately $200 in a household checking account. Everything else is locked pending a full federal audit." Ava sat back in her chair. She tried to imagine Roscoe, the man who had been circling her father's company like a patient predator for years, suddenly discovering that every financial door he tried to open was sealed shut. No cash flow, no reserves, no escape hatches. "There's one more development," Director Harlow said, pulling up a new document on the screen. "Approximately 90 minutes ago, our office received a formal communication from Roscoe's legal counsel. He's requesting an emergency meeting with our division to discuss, and I'm quoting here, a cooperative restructuring of outstanding obligations." "He wants to make a deal," Ava said. "He wants to survive," Silas corrected. "A man like Roscoe doesn't cooperate out of conscience. He cooperates when the cost of fighting becomes higher than the cost of surrendering." Director Harlow nodded. "We haven't responded to his request yet. We wanted to brief you both first, since your corporate assets are central to the case."
Silas leaned forward. Before you respond, there's something else that will happen within the next 24 hours. When Roscoe realizes that his accounts are frozen and his legal position is collapsing, he's going to turn on Eldon Cross. Roscoe extended credit to Eldon based on the promise that he would deliver Cross Logistics. That delivery has failed. Roscoe will want his original money back, every dollar Eldon borrowed, with interest. And Eldon can't pay, Ava said. Eldon has nothing left. He drained your trust to pay off his debts, and now that the trust is frozen under your authority, he has no source of income, no corporate position, and no access to family assets. When Roscoe demands repayment, Eldon's entire scheme collapses. The room was quiet for a moment. Director Harlow made a note on her tablet and looked at Silas. We'll hold off on responding to Roscoe's request until after we see how the situation with Mr. Cross develops. If Roscoe turns on his partner, it strengthens our case considerably. Silas stood. He'll turn. Men like Roscoe don't go down with the ship. They throw everyone else overboard first. Ava stood as well. She shook Director Harlow's hand and thanked the team, then followed Silas out of the conference room and back to the elevator. As the doors closed, Ava leaned against the wall and let out a long, slow breath. It's actually working, she said. Silas pressed the button for the ground floor. It was always going to work. We just needed the right pieces in the right order. Ava looked at him. And Eldon? What happens to him now? Silas watched the floor numbers descend. Now we wait. Roscoe will contact him within 48 hours demanding full repayment. And when Eldon realizes he has nowhere left to turn, he'll come to us. They always do. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened, and they walked out into the cold afternoon air. Somewhere across the city, Roscoe was discovering that his empire had gone silent. And somewhere else, Eldon Cross was about to receive a phone call that would end everything. Eldon called on a Tuesday morning. Eva was sitting in the study at the Woodland estate, reviewing a stack of operational reports from Cross Logistics that the board had forwarded to her over the weekend. The company had continued running in her absence. Mr. Whitfield and Mrs. Okoro had stepped in as interim oversight after Eldon's removal, but there were decisions piling up that needed her attention. Vendor renewals, fleet maintenance schedules, a warehouse lease in Newark that was expiring in 30 days. Normal business, the kind of work her father used to do at his desk every morning with a cup of black coffee and a yellow legal pad. Eva found comfort in it. After nearly 2 weeks of encrypted phones, decoy vehicles, and financial warfare, reading about truck maintenance felt almost peaceful. Her secure phone buzzed at 9:14. She didn't recognize the number, but Silas had told her that only a handful of people had access to this line, and all of them were cleared. She answered. "Eva?" Eldon's voice was thin, stripped of the warmth and confidence he had always worn like a tailored coat. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in days. Eva set down her pen. "How did you get this number?" "I called the Cross Logistics main office, spoke with Whitfield. He wouldn't tell me anything except that you were safe and that I could reach you through a forwarding service. It took me 2 hours and 4 transfers to get connected." Eva said nothing. She waited. "I need to see you," Eldon said. "Please. I know what you must think of me, and I know I don't deserve your time. But Roscoe is... Eva, he's demanding everything, every dollar. He's threatening to file civil claims against me personally, against the family name, against the estate. He says if I don't repay the full amount within 72 hours, he'll take legal action that will drag the Cross name through every courtroom on the eastern seaboard." "And you want me to help you?" Eva said. A pause. She could hear him breathing, heavy, uneven. "I know I have no right to ask." "You're correct. You don't." Another pause, longer this time. "Eva, I made terrible mistakes. I was in debt. I was desperate, and I made choices that I will regret for the rest of my life. But I never wanted to hurt you. Your father was my brother. You are my family." Eva closed her eyes. She could hear the crack in his voice, the way it splintered around the word family. Part of her, A small, stubborn part, buried deep beneath the anger and betrayal, felt something soften. This was the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had taken her to get ice cream on summer evenings when her father was working late, who had sat beside her at the funeral and held her hand while the casket was lowered into the ground. And then he had stolen everything her father left her. "I'll arrange a meeting," Eva said, "but it won't be with me alone. It'll be at Silas's law offices, with legal counsel present, and the terms will be mine." "Eva, those are the conditions, Eldon. Take them or call Roscoe back and explain to him why you can't pay." Silence. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow, noon. You'll receive the address in the morning." She hung up. The meeting took place the following day at the law offices of Drake & Associates, located on the 28th floor of a midtown tower that Silas's organization used for all formal legal proceedings. The office was sleek, modern, and deliberately intimidating. Glass walls, dark furniture, and a long conference table that could seat 16. When Eva arrived with Silas, the room was already prepared. 3 attorneys from Silas's legal team sat on one side of the table, each with a copy of a settlement document that had taken them 48 hours to draft.
Director Harlow's office had sent a representative as well, a compliance officer who would observe the proceedings and confirm that any agreements made were consistent with the ongoing financial investigation. Eldon arrived 12 minutes late. He came alone, no attorney, no advisor, no one standing beside him. He looked like he had aged 5 years in 2 weeks. His suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and the practiced composure he had always carried was gone. He walked into the conference room the way a man walks into a hospital waiting room when he already knows the diagnosis. He sat at the far end of the table without greeting anyone. Roscoe's legal representative arrived separately, a tall, angular man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Mr. Crane. He carried a single briefcase, spoke in measured legal language, and made it clear from his opening remarks that Roscoe's only interest in this meeting was financial recovery. "My client is prepared to accept a structured settlement," Mr. Crane said, placing a folder on the table, "provided the terms adequately compensate for the outstanding debts owed by Mr. Cross and the associated carrying costs." Silas didn't acknowledge the folder. He nodded to his lead attorney, a woman named Grace Ling, who stood and addressed the room. "We have a counter-proposal," Grace said. She distributed copies of the settlement document to Eldon, Mr. Crane, and the compliance officer. "This agreement accomplishes 3 things. First, it establishes a complete and permanent relinquishment by Eldon Cross of all claims, titles, and interests related to Cross Logistics, the Cross Family Trust, and any associated assets. Mr. Cross will resign from any remaining corporate positions and agree to a binding non-involvement clause that prevents him from engaging in any business activity connected to the Cross name." Eldon stared at the document in front of him. He didn't open it. Grace continued. "Second, the agreement requires Mr. Roscoe to accept a full buyout of all legal claims he currently holds against the Cross estate. The buyout amount has been calculated based on the original principal of the debts, excluding the inflated interest and penalty charges that our forensic audit has identified as predatory and legally unenforceable. Upon acceptance, all liens, claims, and financial obligations between Roscoe's lending operation and the Cross family will be permanently dissolved." Mr. Crane opened his mouth to object, but Grace raised a hand. "Third, and this is the part I suggest Mr. Crane consider very carefully, the agreement includes a mutual release clause. If Mr. Roscoe accepts these terms, the evidence gathered during our investigation regarding his lending practices will be submitted to the State Financial Commission as part of a cooperative disclosure. This means reduced penalties, supervised restructuring, and no criminal referral." She paused. "If he declines, the full body of evidence, including 17 counts of predatory lending, 9 instances of fraudulent account manipulation,
and Mr. Roscoe's personal involvement in laundering funds through the Cross corporate structure will be forwarded to the federal prosecutor's office by end of business Friday. The room went silent. Mr. Crane read through the document carefully. His expression didn't change, but Eva noticed his left hand tighten slightly around his pen. After several minutes, he closed the folder and excused himself to make a phone call. He returned 8 minutes later, sat down, and signed on Roscoe's behalf without another word. Grace turned to Eldon. "Mr. Cross." Eldon looked at Eva. His eyes were red. His hands rested flat on the table, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice barely carried across the room. Eva held his gaze. She didn't respond. There was nothing she could say that would undo what he had done, and nothing he could say that would undo what he was about to sign. Eldon picked up the pen. He signed each page slowly, deliberately, as if each signature was pulling something out of him that he would never get back. When he finished, he set the pen down, stood, and left the room without looking at anyone. The compliance officer collected the signed documents, confirmed the record, and shook hands with Grace and Silas before departing. The room emptied. The attorneys packed their briefcases. Mr. Crane disappeared into the elevator. Eva and Silas were the last two people in the conference room. Eva stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline, her arms folded across her chest. Somewhere down there, Eldon was walking out of the building and into a life where the Cross name no longer belonged to him. "It's done," Silas said from behind her. Eva nodded. She didn't turn around. "It's done," she repeated. 4 days passed before Eva felt ready to breathe. She spent them at the Woodland estate, working through the transition plan for Cross Logistics. Mr. Whitfield and Mrs. Okoro had been extraordinary, holding the company together during the chaos, reassuring clients, keeping the fleet moving on schedule. Eva spoke with them daily, reviewing each department, each contract, each pending decision. She was stepping into her father's shoes, and they were larger than she had imagined. But they fit better than she expected. The forensic audit was completed on a Wednesday. Every dollar Eldon had stolen was accounted for. Every shell account Roscoe had used was catalogued and closed. The offshore reserves in Ireland and Singapore were being restored through a structured recovery process overseen by Director Harlow's office. The founding ledger Arthur Riggs had guarded for 7 years was now locked in a private vault at Cross Logistics headquarters, exactly where her father would have wanted it. Eva sat in the estate's study on Thursday evening, reading through the final audit summary, when Silas appeared in the doorway. He was dressed casually, dark trousers, a gray sweater, no jacket. It was the most relaxed she had ever seen him, and even that word felt like a stretch. Silas Drake didn't relax. He just operated at varying degrees of alertness. "There's something I need to give you," he said. Eva looked up from her papers. "Now?" "Tomorrow. I'd like you to come somewhere with me. It won't take long." "Where?" "Brooklyn. The harbor." Eva studied his face. There was something different in his expression, something she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't tension. It wasn't urgency. If anything, it looked like resolve. The kind of expression a person wears when they've made a decision and are prepared to live with the consequences. "All right," she said. They drove to Brooklyn the following afternoon. It was the first time in 2 weeks that Eva didn't feel the low hum of anxiety in her chest during a car ride. No decoy vehicles, no rotating routes, no scanning mirrors for unfamiliar sedans. Just a quiet drive through the city on a Friday afternoon, sunlight breaking through the clouds in long golden shafts that made the buildings glow. The harbor promenade was nearly empty when they arrived. A few joggers, a couple walking a dog, an old man sitting on a bench with a paperback novel. The water stretched out wide and flat, catching the late afternoon light. Manhattan's skyline rose across the river like a photograph, distant, beautiful, and strangely still. They walked along the boardwalk in silence for a while. Eva could smell salt water and old wood. A ferry horn sounded somewhere in the distance, low and long, and the sound reminded her of being a child, of standing on this same waterfront with her father, watching cargo ships move through the harbor while he pointed at each one and told her where it was going. "This is where he used to bring me," Eva said, "when I was little. He'd pick me up from school on Fridays and drive us here.
We'd watch the ships and he'd quiz me on port codes and shipping routes. I hated it at the time. I thought it was the most boring thing in the world," she smiled. "I'd give anything to do it one more time." Silas listened without interrupting. They reached a wooden railing at the edge of the promenade, overlooking a stretch of calm water. He stopped and turned to face her. "Your company is secure," he said. "Your uncle has no legal claim to any cross-family asset. Roscoe's operation has been dismantled. The board is intact, the trust is being restored, and you have full authority over everything your father built." Eva nodded. She knew all of this. She had been living inside every detail of it for the past 2 weeks. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a slim envelope. He held it for a moment, then extended it toward her. "This is what I came to give you." Eva took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single document, printed on formal legal paper, bearing the seal of the New York State court system. Annulment papers. She read through them slowly. The language was clean and straightforward, a mutual dissolution of their marriage, citing the union as a legal arrangement entered into for the purpose of estate protection. No fault, no contest, no obligations remaining on either side. Silas had already signed at the bottom of the last page. The only thing missing was her signature. Eva held the papers and looked out at the water. A cargo ship was moving slowly across the harbor, heading east toward the open ocean. She watched it for a long time. "You promised me this," she said. "I did. You said when it was over, I would have complete freedom, my choice, no conditions." "That's right." Eva turned the pages back to the signature line. She looked at Silas's name, that sharp, angular handwriting she had first seen at the courthouse in White Plains. The signature of a man who had protected her without asking for anything in return, who had honored a debt his father made 18 years ago, who had dismantled an empire to keep a promise. She thought about the night she had walked into the velvet room, the fear in her chest, the trembling in her hands, the desperate calculation that had driven her to propose marriage to a stranger. She had gone to Silas Drake expecting a transaction, a cold, clinical exchange of convenience. And somewhere between the midnight highway and this harbor boardwalk, something had changed. She folded the annulment papers in half, then she tore them down the center. Silas watched her. His expression didn't shift, but something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of surprise, quickly followed by something warmer, something Eva had never seen on his face before. She tore the papers again and again, until the pieces were small enough to hold in one hand. Then she opened her fingers and let the wind carry them off the railing and over the water, where they scattered like confetti across the surface and disappeared. "I'm not signing those," Eva said. Silas was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through his hair, and the last of the afternoon sun caught the side of his face. He looked at her the way he had looked at her that first night in the lounge, steady, measured, reading her like a document he wanted to understand completely. "You're sure," he said. "I walked into your life 15 days ago with nothing except a desperate idea and a name I was afraid of losing. You could have ignored me. You could have taken advantage of the situation. You could have used my company for your own purposes and walked away when it was done. You did none of those things." She stepped closer to him. "You kept every promise you made. You protected me when you didn't have to. You honored a debt I didn't even know existed. And you gave me back everything my father built without asking for a single thing in return." Eva held his gaze.
I'm not signing those papers because this isn't a contract anymore.
And I don't think it has been for a while. Silas looked at her for a long time. The harbor was quiet around them. The ferry horn sounded again, farther away now, fading into the distance like the last note of a song. Then he smiled. It was small, barely there, the kind of smile that would go unnoticed by anyone who wasn't standing close enough to see it. But Eva saw it, and she understood, in that single moment, that she was seeing something rare, something Silas Drake didn't offer to the world. A crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man behind the name. "Then we write new terms," he said. "Together." Eva smiled back. "Together." They stood at the railing as the sun dropped below the skyline, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. The city glittered across the river. The ships moved slowly through the harbor. And two people who had started as strangers, bound by paper, stood side by side, watching the evening settle over the water, knowing that whatever came next would be built on something real. Behind them, the boardwalk stretched long and empty in the fading light. Ahead of them, the harbor opened wide toward the sea, and for the first time in 15 days, neither of them was running from anything.